Welcome back to another episode of the Burning Bear podcast. And I am your host, Anthony. And as always, I am glad to be back with you guys. As you guys are aware of, in our last podcast, I had a guest from the Reno psychedelic panel that we did at the Veteran of Foreign Wars National Conference. And today I have another guest that was on that panel with me. But this guest happens to be a coworker with me at the Grunt Foundation. Our guest today is Derek Blumke. Derek runs a little program called War Cry for Change for the Grunt Foundation. I've been working with him for a few years now. He is a very strong member of our legislative and advocacy team. In addition to working with the Grunt Foundation, Derek is also the National Legislative Committee member for the Veteran of Foreign Wars. He is the state legislative director of the VFW Department of Michigan. He is the co-chair of the Michigan Commanders Group Legislative Committee and the chair of the Psychotropic Safety Subgroup of the Michigan Governor's Challenge. It's not too often that I have to read off the qualifications of my guest, but this particular guest has been fighting the veterans fight and the battle for veterans for more than 19 years. So today's guest is Mr. Derek Blumke. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm wonderful, Anthony. Thanks a lot. And thanks for making me feel old by the 19 years of work on this. So appreciate it.
I can't be the only one that feels old. So you have to get drug into this with me. So why don't you take a minute and just tell our guests anything else that you would like to tell them about yourself? Your long history and list of credentials. You told me you started doing this back in 2007. So go ahead and take the floor, sir.
Well, thanks a lot, Anthony. So I've been working on veterans programs or initiatives or business opportunities for years, going from starting Student Veterans America in 2008 after getting out of the Air Force. Went to work at the VA, built a national mental health program for the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, then subsequently moved to New York City, got into technology startups, and continued on advocating when I got back to Michigan, based upon my own personal experiences, like many have, in that I was over-medicated, I was over-prescribed, impacted my life and my career, and that resulted in me moving back to Michigan. And kind of that story that we hear of veterans struggling and possibly being homeless, that was kind of the life that I experienced for a period of time. And that led me to this work today, which is addressing the overprescribing and the role of medications in veteran suicides. And I think as we're all watching the news today with the Lindsay Clancy trial in Massachusetts, a very tragic and devastating pop culture moment, unfortunately, that's playing out on national television and on our devices around the world. And it's basically what we're seeing is not just Lindsay Clancy being on trial, but what we're seeing is the entire mental health system in the United States and the treatment of mental health, especially when it comes to medications and psychiatry, is right now on trial in Massachusetts. And I think we're going to talk about that. But that's my background, why I'm here. And I came to the Grunt Foundation a few years ago after my work with the VFW on this issue. And I think in the past 2.5 years, we've helped to platform and make this issue a frontline top priority issue for many national veterans groups, to include the Veterans of Foreign Wars and many others. So it's been a ride, and I'm just thankful to be working with you and the rest of our team and the rest of our counterparts to end an epidemic. So,
yeah. Well, man, I'll tell you what, I'm super glad that you're doing what you're doing. And I think that one of the things that I'm enjoying about bringing guests like you on is I think it's really important to show the face of the fight. People don't understand how much of this legislative and advocacy fight is happening behind the scenes. Just a few weeks ago, we were in D.C. and we were fighting with the VFW over the TCAVA bill and Section 108. And, there is so much groundwork that goes into this legislative advocacy side of the veterans things. It's not always that frontline mission. Sometimes it's that backline mission that brings things to the foreground. And I'm so grateful for people like yourself and all of the other members of the VFW and like-kind groups out there that are working so hard in this advocacy space. Our very own Will Wisner is one, and Tim Jensen is another one, huge champions of advocacy in the veteran space. And so I think that's an important thing to kind of highlight, to kind of bring in that, there's just so much work going on in the background here. But yeah, let's go ahead and start talking about the Lindsay Clancy, because I'm recently aware aware of this situation. You got me up to speed on it, and then I started listening to it, and I thought, oh my goodness, as soon as I heard the SSRIs, I thought, okay, this is a really unfortunate situation. So would you take a few minutes? You're more qualified than I. Would you give the rundown of the situation for the audience in case they're not aware of what's going on?
Sure. So Lindsay Clancy was a mother. In 2022, in January, Lindsay killed her 3 children. It was on the news then. She is alleged to have strangled them with exercise bands, and then she cut her wrist, tried to cut her throat, and then threw herself out of a window on the 2nd floor. And she is now paralyzed as she's sitting in the courtroom today facing trial for the murder of her 3 kids. And I think when you're watching this, I think a lot of people may have come in with kind of some preconceived thoughts. But as we're watching the defense attorney present the case and watching the prosecution do, I think anyone would admit a terrible job of presenting the state's case against her. What we're seeing is Lindsay was initially entered into the mental health system because she had postpartum depression or psychosis. And so she just had a child less than 6 months earlier. And she entered the mental health system through the form of meeting with a psychiatrist. And that psychiatrist, I believe, initially diagnosed her with either postpartum depression or psychosis. And that is when a medication cascade began. And so it first initiated, I believe, with an antidepressant and a benzodiazepine, and quickly scaled, going from one medication to another antipsychotic to a sedative, ultimately 13 different medications, 32 different prescriptions, increases, decreases, removals from her medication regimen over the course of 4 months. The day before she murdered her kids, she had just had an appointment with her psychiatrist where I believe medications were changed again. And so anybody who's working on this issue, it's not been a very popular one because it's stuff like this, unfortunately. Historically, we've been primarily focusing our conversations within the veterans community on suicides, because as we know, it's about 6,000 veterans take their own lives a year. It's actually closer to 6,400 on average. It's about 62 to 63 since 2001. We know that about 70% of all veterans under VA care are prescribed a psychiatric drug. We also know that these medications have suicide risks, and some even have warnings for homicidal ideation in addition to suicidal ideation. And so when you stack all these things up, it's not too hard to put your finger on what's going on within the veteran community. But when you look at parallels, civilian society, where there's parallel prescription rates or similar prescription rates, we see that with primarily white, middle-class, educated white women. Their prescription rates for antidepressants are over 25% of all women in the United States are prescribed an antidepressant. Prescription rates for veterans under VA care is upwards of 28%. Total psychiatric drug prescribing, I think I said, is 70% of all vets at VA are prescribed a psychiatric drug. And so when we're looking at this case, what we're seeing is a continued, not just a cascade of prescribing, but a cascade of failures that resulted in this tragedy, and basically watching the field of psychiatry and the way we do mental health in the United States today basically being under indictment. The defense attorney is trying to protect Lindsay, and you've seen examples throughout this case where she broke down sobbing in court just a few days ago and screamed, "I can't do this." And in her wheelchair because she's now paralyzed, because they were going through the autopsy reports of her kids. One child is under a year old. The other one is just 2 or 3 years old. The other one is not much older than that. This is very difficult. So clearly, because many of us have families. I've got a 1-year-old little girl, and working on this issue, the reason I'm still doing this, as hard as it is because my wife is insistent that we don't give up, and I don't give up, because we don't want this to happen to our daughter. Or some similar event or negative outcome. And this is what we're seeing you can see it in our eyes right now, just trying to keep ourselves from crying, hearing about this.
Yeah, I mean, this particular situation really hits home with me. And yeah, and it's not a situation I talk about much, but it's also one that I've shared publicly. But I was in this position, and not with the SSRI cocktail. Thankfully, if I've ever done one thing well in my life, I have made sure to say no to that. But many years ago, somewhere around the 2016 to 19 range, I had went through this really major depression and I had spiraled for months. Typically my depressive spirals would go for like a few weeks and then they kind of go away. And this particular one went on for months. And I mean, I was just in the hole, in the hole, in the hole. And it just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And I had finally got to the point to where I was so convinced, I was so upset with the fact that I existed. Like I was so mad at God and everything, and I just having this massive existential crisis. Like the world's all screwed up. I hate everyone. I hate being here. Why am I here? God put me here for no reason. Obviously I feel differently about that now. But at that time, I had this overwhelming guilt that I had also brought my children into this world. Like here I am so upset and so mad that I exist. And then also equally responsible for now bringing new life into this, what I felt at the time was like this prison of existence that was just torture. And I was laying in bed one night with my son, and I don't remember how old he was, somewhere between 6 and 9. My daughter was a few years younger, so she must have been in the 4 to 5 range. And I was laying there in bed with my son, and I started having the homicidal ideation. It was like, if I felt so guilty for bringing him into the world, and then I thought, I could take him out of this. I could save him from all of this pain and this torture. And then I was envisioning I'm holding him in my arms, and I'm envisioning, the steps that I would take to make him not be here. And then I thought about going down the hallway to where my daughter was at, doing the same thing, going out into the kitchen my ex-wife was at that time, and doing it to her and then doing it to myself. And as a combat veteran, somebody who has been to war, I believe that these situations take on a different contextual meaning and a certain level of severity when you are not really opposed to that level of violence. And I found myself on the verge, the absolute teetering verge of making the most horrific mistake of my life. And thankfully I got up, and I literally got up and ran out of my house, and I jumped in my vehicle and I just left home. I thought the safest thing for me to do is get as far away from my family as possible. I was not safe to be around, and I called my best friend at the time, and he kind of talked me off the ledge. So like this story with her really hits home for me, because I understand, we can be so judgmental in some of these spaces, and we throw around these words like depression, suicidal ideation, homicidal ideation, and we make these things so commonplace that we kind of dismiss them, and we don't understand like just how serious these conditions really are. Like when you have homicidal ideation, you're thinking about taking the life of another person. When you are suicidal ideation, you're contemplating taking your own life. These are no small things. It doesn't matter how normalized they are or how many people are suffering from it. That's the symptom. That's the condition. That's the sadness in my space. But it's so serious, and it's so detrimental to the life and the quality of life for so many people. So, man, my heart really goes out to this woman. But, I have so many more questions, right? What is it about SSRIs as somebody who's never been on them? I know how I got there. But in your opinion, like, how did the SSRIs contribute to this woman getting here? Or do you think that she was already maybe on that path? Because I know that postpartum depression's a mother effort, man. Like I've watched that with my ex-wife, and I've seen that with so many women right after pregnancy. Like my heart really goes out to people with postpartum depression. Another one that doesn't get enough attention, not enough respect, in my opinion. So like, I want to hear, as an expert, what is your opinion on this, and how does this happen?
Well, first, I want to make a couple of clarifying points. One is when we talk about these larger issues of medications, veteran suicides, and what we're talking about in the Clancy trial, what we're really seeing is not just SSRIs. It's not just one drug class that's the culprit. It's pretty much all the medications we have on the market today for mental health all have risk profiles. Any treatment modality has risk profiles associated with it. Counseling has risk profiles and can result in suicide when you're going through some of these traumatic events in the past. And if you don't have the right support, or you don't have the greatest therapist or counselor, or you just have a hard time dealing with it. So all of these, any treatment, regardless of whether it's for a headache or a brain tumor or whatever it may be, every treatment has a risk profile. And specifically, though, with medications and mental health, most of these drugs have warnings from the Food and Drug Administration. And so in 2004, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRI antidepressants, they had a box warning added, so which is the strongest warning that the Food and Drug Administration could provide. Outside of taking a drug off of the market, is a box warning. And their warning was for adolescents and kids for suicidal thoughts and behaviors. Lay people can translate that into suicidal possible action, and suicide risk is what we're talking about. They like to try to split the hairs here between what is ideation, what is behaviors, suicide risk. That's what it is. Let's not split the hairs. Let's talk about what it is. It's suicide risk. And others, again, have risk of homicide, and they have homicidal ideation listed as possible risk profiles. And so what we're talking about here is largely a lot of medication classes that we had a great deal of trust in our science and how these medications came to market. So our regulatory agencies and our government, because we believe that our government, let me rephrase. We once believed that our government is looking out for our interests and is looking to protect us. I think we now understand that it's our government is looking out for the interests of corporations and industry, and that if we can extract $1 out of a human flesh, that flesh is coming out. And so when people go to their doctor, they believe that the treatments that are being provided or offered are proven safe and proven to work. And we also believe our doctors know best, and that they've been educated and trained on these things, whether it's mental health medications or whether it's treatment for a broken ankle or a heart condition. We believe that they have been properly educated and trained, and therefore they are the experts, and they're the ones that can help us deal with a variety of maladies we may experience throughout our lives. And unfortunately, though, when it comes to mental health and similarly what we saw with pain with opioid epidemic, we were given a false narrative. We were given a story that was not true. Some of this is actually also coming out in the Clancy case. What we're seeing is the physicians and the health systems that were treating Lindsay, because she's in the greater Boston area, she was being treated by a McLean hospital system. Many of her psychiatrists and doctors all have Ivy League educations. One of the expert witnesses that testified, psychiatrist, she is the chief of psychiatry at McLean and also is a professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. And what we're seeing is a lot of this misrepresentations and miseducation coming out on the stand, and a couple of examples of this. Her treating psychiatrist that treated her from September through January of 2022, she had actually only just gotten her full license to practice on her own a month earlier. She'd finished her residency, and then she started her job at McLean, and she just started there and advertised herself as an expert in postnatal health and postnatal depression and whatnot. And she had a month of experience, a month on the job formally doing this type of stuff. So she probably saw a couple of other patients with similar examples, but also admitted on the stand she never saw another patient with postnatal psychosis. And so what we're seeing is we're watching her testify, and the defense attorney asked her psychiatrist, so you have to tell me here, I'm not sure I understand this. Did you just stop her from her Zoloft that you'd been prescribing her, 50 milligrams? You just stopped her? Is that safe? The defense attorney asked, knowing the answer. And the psychiatrist actually provided an answer that was the furthest thing from the truth and even terrifying, bordering on, I'd say, criminal negligence, is that she stated that because she was on such a low dose of Zoloft, she could just stop at any time and there's no issues whatsoever. Well, Lindsay is being treated at the starting and the maintenance dose for many Americans, which is 50 milligrams. And I have particular experience with Zoloft or sertraline, the antidepressant made by Pfizer and now a generic. I was prescribed Zoloft for 1 year, and I was trapped on that drug for an additional year because my body had become dependent on it. And I described that year of my life as probably the most horrific year of my life, and that it was physical pain, physiological injuries to my ankles and calves and legs. It was panic attacks. It was anxiety, depression, worse than what I experienced prior to even entering treatment. And I had to taper myself off of that medication on my own using a razor blade to shave the granules off the pill because my doctor didn't believe what I was experiencing. Well, Lindsay Clancy, psychiatrist, testified basically the same thing that my psychiatrist would have said, which is, oh, you can just stop at any time and you're fine. Or what they'd previously said is you cut your pills in half for a few weeks, cut them in half for another few weeks, and you can stop and no issue. That's what we've been told. That guidance was based on 6 to 8 week trials, of which these medications were originally approved for. And so when you're on a medication for 6 to 8 weeks, there's a much lower likelihood of dependency, and was not accounting for people being on these things for many months and many years, decades. Many people have been on these medications since they came out in 1988 in the early 90s. So like 40 years nearly. And so what we saw with the psychiatrist, she said, oh, you can just stop. We did not need to do a tapering because she was on a low dose. That in itself is negligent. And then you had the other psychiatrist, the expert that I just mentioned, that is the chief psychiatrist at McLean. She then testified and was asked about how or what SSRIs are. And so I'll tell you what they are, and then I'll recap what she said. So SSRIs are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and what we had been told for the past 40 years is these medications work by correcting a chemical imbalance or deficiency of serotonin in the brain, and that depression is caused by the serotonin deficiency, and so therefore this medication increases serotogenic activity in the body and in the brain, solving for depression. That was never true. There was never any science or studies to show that was true. The studies that Lilly and other companies based that theory on, and Pfizer, were based on studies since 1979 and 82. And those studies actually showed that was not true, that was not the case. And even to measure serotonin levels in the body, you have to do a spinal tap. So this is not an easy thing to do. This is a risky thing to do, and you don't want to do it to everybody because you possibly risk CNF fluid leakage and all kinds of other issues that go along with that. And so the psychiatrist repeated that false proven theory that is now public knowledge. And this person is probably one of the most educated people in America, probably one of the most pedigreed psychiatrists in America, Harvard professor. And she told a jury under oath something that was absolutely completely false. And is based on a myth that the drug industry and the American Psychiatric Association pushed for the past 40 years. And it's only taken pushback from many experts, and research studies largely come out of Europe, especially Joanna Moncrief's study of 2022 that showed, meta-analysis study showed no connection whatsoever between serotonin deficiency and depression, zero. And so what we're seeing is that the people that we're trusting our nation's mental health with, and for our purposes, our veterans' mental health with, is a profession that clearly does not know what it's doing, does not have the training, was never educated on adverse drug events, never trained or educated on tapering. And where this is so powerful is that it's taken 40 years before our government finally acknowledged there are issues with dependency and commonly prescribed antidepressants and SSRIs. And it took Secretary Kennedy making an announcement on May 3rd or 4th, stating such that we are going to provide standardized training and standardized protocols for tapering people off these medications when they so choose to. 40 years. And these drug companies knew that there was dependency risk for these medications before they even came to market. And so, and that's where it's hard, I think, is we're watching this trial play out, and hard not being angry. But I think you and I probably learned that the more we show our anger, the more it can be off-putting. And and what we really want is to show how tragic these experiences are, and that the real impact on humans and our neighbors and our friends and our families. Because when you finally look at this and you really understand it, whether you're a doctor or whether you're a researcher or any Joe, Jane American, it's an eye-opening experience of which you can't turn your head away from anymore.
Yeah, I agree. It's a really terrible situation. And I mean, there's so much that you said that you are right. I get angry. If there's anything that I've learned really intimately in the last 6 years of my life is that most of the popular science is complete bullshit. And it's so hard to make that realization for a person because we're taught our whole lives. You go to school and they said, well, you got to listen to the doctors. You got to listen to these people. These are the experts. And then you get these people that come out of medical school that you're right. They put this as dogma out in medical school. They don't follow any current research. They're relying on stuff that was 30, 40, 50 years old. They don't understand that these studies were funded by pharmaceutical companies as a one-size-fits-all cure. Right. And just in that alone, like, let's just use common sense. If I come into you and I want therapy because I am depressed, period, it is, to me, very obvious what has led to my depression. I have thoughts, I have behaviors, I have habits, and I have actions that I am employing on an everyday basis and beliefs, right? How I believe, how I internally speak to myself, that is creating this feeling of depression throughout all of these other events. Mm-hmm. There's no pill for that. Mm-hmm. There is no pill for that. That takes work. That takes time. That takes reprogramming your brain. That takes reprogramming neural pathways. That creates new habits, new behaviors, a new way of thinking, challenging your old beliefs, establishing new beliefs, running into a new paradigm of being. And then maybe there is some medicine that might help me in some of this transition. This is not, oh, well, just keep doing everything that you've been doing that brought you to this point, and then here, we'll give you this pill and it'll take it away. Yes, that makes me so angry. It's such bullshit. In most doctors today, they don't have any education on nutrition. They don't have any understanding of behavioral rewiring. Shout out to the cognitive behavioral therapists that are out there. But, like Dr. Sands said when he was and he's a psychiatrist, does ketamine therapy. But when I asked him, he said all the same thing you just said. He's like, it's unbelievable how bad this stuff is. And he's like, if I wouldn't go on an SSRI, he's like, there's no way. There's no way. He's like, there's better, safer alternative treatments out there. And so my next question for you then, because I sometimes I get a little confused. This isn't an area I actually know a lot of science on because, you lead the SSRI thing. I lead the psychedelic thing. So serotonin, it's a hormone, correct?
Yeah, it's a neurotransmitter in the body. Yeah. Yep. Okay.
So, one of the thoughts that I had, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit more, is I was on testosterone replacement therapy for a long time. And so when you were talking about extended time frames, all I could think of is like, oh, that makes sense to me. When your body has a hormone regulation, you have things that are upstream and downstream. Like, we just don't have testosterone in our body. We have DHEA, we have zinc, we have boron, we have all of these little things that attribute to, we have free testosterone, we have testosterone, then we have estradiol and estrogen, and all these things evolve in this ratio that's occurring in your body. And when you start taking a synthetic of that, so you start taking synthetic testosterone, what happens is that chain of events leading to your production of testosterone shuts down because your body says, oh, look, I already have enough testosterone. It can't tell the difference between the synthetic and the regular. So all it's looking at is you have enough testosterone in your body, and then your body quits producing testosterone, which, while you're on the therapy, unless some of those other up or downstream issues create a problem, which is why most people have to start supplementing like DHEA, zinc, and other types of things when they're on testosterone. But the real danger is when you come off, because now your body is shut down. You don't produce testosterone anymore. So when people come off of these therapies, they go through massive depressions. They get suicidal ideation. They develop erectile dysfunction. They have all of these problems because once you're on that for a sustained period of time, if you look at the short-term studies, sure, you can go on testosterone and come off, like you said, in 6 to 8 weeks. No big deal. when you get to the 1, 2, 3 year mark and your body hasn't been producing testosterone for 3 years, this may take a year or two for your body to kick these things back on. So I was thinking of this concept when we were talking about the SSRIs, and I was like, ooh, maybe if this is a similar situation, I could see how long-term dependency really creates the serious issue, because it's physiologically and biologically stopping your natural production or disrupting your natural balance within your body. And how do you recover from that? So
Right.
am I on point here, or did I just completely miss it?
No, you're right on spot. So, like we talked about earlier, every treatment has a risk profile. Every action in the universe has a subsequent equal or greater reaction. And what we see, like you mentioned with testosterone therapy, which I'm not as familiar with, is I could imagine also being similar with what we're seeing with these medications, because anything that changes the way your body functions, and that's what these things do. And especially with what we're talking about with, say, sertraline, the antidepressant, or other psychiatric drugs, these are not natural substances. What they are is they're compounds and chemicals that create behavioral changes. And we can see those behavioral changes in good ways, and we can see them as maybe seemingly less depressed mood, but we can also see the negative changes as being the actual direct consequences and not necessarily side effects. So all of these treatments, whether it's an antidepressant, whether it's an antipsychotic, whether it's hormone replacement therapy, whatever it may be, everything is going to affect the body differently. And the reality is that I think we've been overconfident in our own abilities and our expertise. And when I say that, I don't think I'm talking about you and myself here. I'm talking about, we think we know the brain so well. We think we know how everything works, and we think we know everything about the body, and that we're in 2026 and we're so far more advanced than we were 50 years ago, which is very true. But I'd say similar to the CEO of Alex Karp with Palantir. He had a rant on a business channel a month ago, about AI and how all industries have grown tired and pissed off at the AI companies, the frontier AI companies, your Chat GPTs and Anthropics and others, for over marketing and embellishing the technology's capabilities today. Because the reality is the technologies they've created are just mind-blowingly powerful. And unfortunately, the sell to companies is still, oh, this thing can do everything for you. You don't need half of your workforce, all these things. And they've incorporated these technologies and finding that they're not working as well as they believed and expected them to be. And now they're having to go back and rehire many of their employees that they let go because the technology is not what it was advertised and told to them.
Yeah.
And I'd say similar here is that we believed that we knew how these medications worked. We believed we knew the root of mental illness. We believed that there were real genetic, in which this is true, but really, truly mental illness is caused by biological issues. And in some cases, that is true. And in many cases, that can be true for like a predisposition for maybe depression or anxiety, or attention deficit, or whatever it may be. But when you look at like where we're at, really is we don't know a thing. We were continuing to find ourselves in the situation where we tell ourselves we know what we're doing. We know how we have this new class of painkillers that is OxyContin. It is non-addictive. It is the safest pain medication in the world. It's the greatest advancement of the field of medicines ever created. And that we don't need to worry about addiction and overdose because this new thing is different. It's an opiate, but it's a different opiate. No, it's still an opiate. It caused, we have a prescribed epidemic. And the difference between that epidemic and the epidemic that we're talking about with psychotropic medications is that we were forced to walk over bodies in the streets because of the overdoses that really began with a prescription of a painkiller and went from that. And when they couldn't get the painkiller because our government said, oh, wait a minute, we have a problem here, we're going to abruptly yank everybody off of their pain medications. Well, these people developed addictions and dependencies. They need something. And that's where heroin comes in, and now fentanyl. And what we're seeing with this epidemic is different. It's more pernicious and it's more, I think, destructive. And I believe scales of magnitude greater than the opiate epidemic, because this one makes you look crazy first. This one makes you look like you are unstable. It makes you look like you're psychotic. It makes you look like you're paranoid. Those are all behaviors that are induced by many of these commonly prescribed medications. But it is the same situation that we found ourselves in with the opiate epidemic. We were sold a bill of goods by industry and our medical establishment, and that bill of goods turned out to be entirely false. And now families across the country and courtrooms like we're seeing out in Massachusetts, we're watching the devastation occurring to our friends and family members and unspeakable tragedies. Killing your children is not a natural thought. Like what you mentioned earlier, where you had these thoughts, the difference between those thoughts and what we're seeing in actions and people completing this is that a lot of times these medications can induce you to think that this is what I have to do now. And I can speak to that because that was my experience. When I was coming off of Zoloft, I felt like I was being fed gunpowder.
Yeah.
I've, outside of a fist fight with my best friend on active duty when I was junior listed forever ago, of which we had too many adult beverages, and literally 2 hours later we were shaking hands and sitting in our front yard again, having another adult beverage. And I've never had thoughts of violence in my life, never thoughts of suicide until being prescribed some of these medications. And
Yeah.
I think our friends and our family members and our communities just deserve a lot better. And it begins with honesty and truth. And unfortunately, it has to come out in a courtroom where you've got a mother paralyzed in a wheelchair, having to suffer through the autopsy reporting of her children that she killed.
Well, you know what I think is hopeful. So we are starting to move into an era, because of the internet, because of podcasts like this one and so many others, that we're starting to challenge the status quo. You know, when I was on TRT, I did all of my own research. I realized really quickly that most doctors in this space are not highly educated, right? Hormones, contrary to belief, are not something that is very well understood by doctors for men or women, especially for women. Better understood for men, way less understood for women. And your average patient, if you're an educated individual and knows how to do a little bit of research, and there's plenty of places, you know, there's a lot of Facebook board groups, Reddit groups, things like that are full of great information, and other doctors who have accepted this. You know, my wife just listened to this great podcast, and once I get the information from her, I'll link it in the description. But where this doctor had basically just discovered like vitamin D, and she's going through all of this stuff, a highly trained doctor. And in the podcast, she's like, it's embarrassing how much I didn't understand and how much I didn't know. She's like, I relied on all this stuff that I was taught in medical school as dogma and just completely ignored the research. And she's like, and some of these things are so basic and so rudimentary. How did I not understand that? And it's because now we're starting to understand that health is a holistic endeavor. You know, when I look back at this situation, or I look back at like my situation, it's easy for me to identify what went wrong. Like even today, if I'm tired, oh man, it's a lot harder to stave off negative thoughts. Okay, well, just that alone, just being tired, overworked, overstressed, isn't that the condition of every American that lives today? If you have a job and you're going to work and you're not sleeping enough and you're trying to raise a family and you're doing all this, number one, you're tired. Well, if being tired produces a negative mental state for somebody who is typically in a great mood, oh man, imagine how much worse that is when you got a negative internal voice, when you're dealing with high stress, and now you got money issues, you got work issues, your boss is on your ass, you got marriage issues, and you're super tired and you're overstressed and you're overworked and you don't have enough free time. Oh my gosh, that just by itself is such a recipe for negative thought, period. And then you get into the fact that now look at what you eat. Man, you know, now that I've cleaned up my diet, I don't take up the chemicals anymore. I don't take in the processed foods. I don't take in lots of sugars. I eat a high protein, low carb diet. I take in the proper amount of fats. I'm taking in proper supplementation. I'm focusing on cellular health. I'm doing all of these things. I'm fasting properly. But guess what? When I don't eat properly, I feel that. And guess what feeling that does? It makes me feel like shit. When I feel like shit, I think like shit. These things all work together. And so when you realize this and you start adding it all together, then you're, well, no wonder I was where I was at. I was 80, 90 pounds overweight. My food intake was shit. My hormones were shit. I was stressed. I had money issues. I had family issues. I had work issues. I didn't sleep enough, and wonder why I got to the point that my brain wasn't working the right way. And this is where I'm so hopeful that some of the medical community is starting to come around, and cases like this are highlighting this. There's more going on here than just this singular issue. We have to start treating the human as a whole, and we have to start looking at these issues and the correlations between them. These are cross-dimensional issues, and you have to treat them cross-dimensionally, or you're not going to come to a solution. But, one of the things you said to me, and I actually know nothing about, that's why I was really getting excited to ask you. You said that this issue with Lindsay Clancy is a direct tie to the veteran community. How does this relate to veterans, and what are you talking about there? Because I was like, okay, I'm ready to know this.
Well, I'm gonna share my screen real fast. I'm gonna show you the cascade of prescriptions that Lindsay Clancy experienced that resulted in this tragedy. And I won't say it any other way. This is what caused this.
Okay.
And so this is her cascade of prescribing, 5 different prescribers, 13 different drugs, 32 different prescriptions over the course of 4 months. This is Lindsay Clancy. Yeah. And so this is why when you're going through and watching this entire case is about her medication history. And what's coming out is that these medications have risk profiles of all the things that we're talking about. Now, when we're talking about why does this and how does this parallel with the veteran community? Well, I don't think you can find a whole lot of veterans out there that haven't had this experience where they go in and they're asked if they're struggling or if they're having any mental health issues, and then they get prescribed a medication. And then they get prescribed another medication. And all of a sudden they're on 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 medications, most of which are now meant to correct for the side effects of another. Well, this is where we have a parallel, and it's a tragic parallel. And what I would love to see is congressional hearings in shorter form, but replicating what we're seeing with the Lindsay Clancy case. And that there's a young woman and a young man that within just over 48 hours of each other, both murdered their mothers in 2022 while under the care of the VA and the very same outpatient clinic, Chico VA clinic. They were short on prescribers and couldn't keep up with the patient demand. And so when she went to the VA and her parents took her there, talking about the bolts of lightning hitting her, putting tinfoil all over windows, the paranoid thoughts, all these things. Well, what she was describing a psychiatric drug withdrawal. And when she went to the VA clinic, they did not see her in a timely fashion. And instead she got turned away and was not prescribed the medication that she'd requested. If you're going to look at this list, it's a similar operation that we saw with Lindsay Clancy and what we saw with Julia Larson, this young woman, Navy veteran, had transitioned out of active duty. I was going to college at Chico State, is doing well other than dealing with a treatment for MST or military sexual assault from active duty. She walked in, was prescribed an antidepressant, Bupropion, and then went to another stimulant for ADHD, and then down the list. And this resulted in the death of her mother because she ended up going home that night after the VA turned her away, and she got in a firefight with her dad in the house, and a bullet went straight and hit her mother in the thigh and ultimately killed her. The same day that event happened, Andrew Isles, an Air Force veteran, had called the VA clinic saying that he was having these thoughts and that he'd become paranoid again and he'd stop taking his medication. They requested that he recontinue his medications. And the next day, it's clear that he did not, as he ended up murdering his mother with a shotgun. within just over 48 hours of each other, treated by the same VA clinic, both going through psychiatric drug withdrawal, both clearly going through psychiatric drug withdrawal. And both of them were found not guilty for reason of insanity, and both of them are still sitting in psychiatric wards in Southern California. But the tragedy here is that Lindsay Clancy, Julia Larson, and Andrew Isles are the most supreme victims of what we're talking about today. It's not the mother. She loved her mother. Imagine doing something like this to your parents or your child, and then having to live with that for the rest of your life, and possibly remembering it all. And if they did, and you want to talk about a victim here, instead they're being prosecuted, instead of getting the help they need, instead of having accountability. Like, the most we've gotten for accountability for Julia and for Andrew is that there were a couple long form investigative pieces by ProPublica, and the OIG did an investigation into the treatment of Julia Larson, which her name is not even on the OIG investigation for HIPAA reasons. But you can't separate the date and the time and all the circumstances. This is Julia Larson's prescription Cascade. And so I believe that we deserve it to our entire country. And I believe our health community has a responsibility to take action and take accountability. Say, hey, we didn't know everything. We can do better. And here's how we're going to do that. And the first way in which they need to do so is by listening to their patients for the first time in probably all of their lives. That includes our most senior health leaders in this country. That includes the people running the American Psychiatric Association. You're going to have to sleep at night. And if you're not the psychiatrist that prescribed a cocktail like this or an individual medication and did not provide informed consent and warn the patients, that way they could tell their family, hey, I'm on this medication. If you see these things from me, let me know because I might have a medication reaction. If they're not doing that, how are you going to go to sleep at night knowing that while you didn't maybe prescribe the individual medication on the ground level, the patient level, you're the one responsible for the system. Mm-hmm. You're at the macro level. You're not responsible for 3 kids and a suicide attempt. You're responsible for hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of suicides and murders and failed marriages and destroyed families and down the list, job failure. I mean, you also see as antidepressants entered the markets, really the modern class of SSRIs, a report was done by Robert Whitaker in 2016 where he testified to the UK Parliament, and he provided a presentation that showed country by country as antidepressant prescribing hit markets, increases in prescription rates, and then subsequent increases in SSI and SSDI or mental illness disability claims, nation by nation. First, the United States, Denmark, UK, further east. And so, I mean, when we're talking about these issues, you and I think our colleagues, we're talking about the macro. We have to look at cases like this because they're the case examples and the spotlight where we can see the failure right in front of us. And you can see in the individual case, the failure in front of us, but exposing what's going on nationally, it really needs to come from our public health leaders. It needs to come from the people leading the APA. It needs to come from the AMA. It needs to come from the National Association of Social Workers and the American Psychological Association saying our patients deserve better and we commit to do so going forward. And here's how we're going to do that.
Well, the reform is really going to be in the hands of the practitioners and the patients. Because, one thing that we have to understand, and if anybody out there listening in the audience doesn't understand this, let me clarify this for you. Corporations, it's profits over people every single time. That's what we see in this AI battle, right? It's the clearest place. Corporations are choosing to implement AI in place of people. Why? To save money. En masse. What are AI companies trying to do? They're selling their product.
Not save money, make money. Profits for them.
Yeah, but essentially, they're lowering their overhead. They're increasing their productivity. So this is an opportunity for them to make even more money, to be more productive at the expense of the human being, at the expense of the employee, at the expense of the citizen, at the expense of the individual that is now no longer able to contribute to the economy and provide for themselves, right? And we see this. So when you look at the pharmaceutical companies, I'm a professor of economics. And so I have been teaching economics for many years. So some of the figures I'm getting ready to give you are a little bit old. It's been a while since I've given these specific presentations. But when we used to look at the G7, G9 nations, and we would look at the amount of CEO pay per industry as a multiple of the average pay. So many years ago, when I used to give this presentation to my class of students, I think the United States was like 300 times more than the average pay of your average worker. And then you look at the next closest G7 nation at the time, I think it was like Japan or something like that, and they were like 47 times, right? And then when you looked at the healthcare and the pharmaceutical industry, at that time, the American CEOs were making on average about 350 times what the average worker was making. And then the next closest country was Japan, where they were like at 47 times the average worker pay. But in the healthcare and the pharmaceutical industries, over 500 times the average pay. So these corporations are highly profitable. But where the pushback needs to come is these corporations are going to stand up tomorrow and stop selling medications. They don't care. Let's be honest. They don't care what the side effects are. They don't care how bad it's hurting people. You don't have to look any further than Ozempic to see that. They don't care what the side effects are. They don't care how it's going to hurt people. But now you have practitioners that are believing their science and they're prescribing it. But it's not their fault until they know better. Maya Angelou says, once you know better, do better. So for those out there that don't know better, that's fine. Once you know better, do better. And then it's your job to change what you were doing to help eliminate this. For the patients out there, educate yourself. Understand that you are in charge of your healthcare, not your healthcare provider. You are in charge of understanding what they don't know, because they don't know everything. And they're also being lied and manipulated by the same pharmaceutical companies that we're being lied and manipulated by. They're having drug reps that are coming into their office. They're getting showed fake studies just like we are on TV. They're getting all of the same commercials that we're getting. They don't know any better either. And for the ones that are out there that do know better and are still doing it, well, they're just as guilty. And then I agree with you. It's like, how do they sleep at night? Like, this is a disgusting issue that is replicated over so many different topics within our world today that it's about time that we finally take a stand and we say, enough is enough. Why are we entertaining situations like this? Why does it take a case where a mom murders her children to get enough attention to realize, what about all the other people that have already committed suicide? What about the other people that killed their parents, like you were talking about? What about all of these other examples? Wait, no, we got to wait until it's some type of media publicity issue that it's so extreme that we can't ignore it anymore, that, now we're going to go take action. And I get fired up and a little frustrated, and that's probably why we do the stuff that we do, right? That's why we're involved into the nonprofit space. That's why we're working with the Grunt Style Foundation. That's why we're out there fighting these fights, because once you know better, you have to do better. And I just can't stand on the sidelines and do nothing. And neither can you, right? You have to be involved in the fight. So let's take a quick break. All right. So back from our little break, man, I tell you what, I had a chance to reflect on my statements, and I wish I'd calm down, but I don't. I actually get more upset.
It's hard. It is hard.
The more I go into this. But, I love this statement, if not me, then who? If not now, then when? Right? Isn't that what motivated so many of us to go into service? Isn't that what motivated the call? I get so frustrated. There's so many people in the world that talk about wanting the world to change. They get so upset about these issues. Where are you at? Like, and I hate to challenge my listeners, but like, that's kind of what I'm here for. But like, where are you at? If you believe so strongly about these things, where are you at? When are you going to stand up? When are you going to join this fight? When are you going to use your voice and say enough is enough? One of the best examples that I've seen of this, I watched a documentary recently, this Greta Thunberg. She's a Swedish activist. Do you know who she is?
I think everybody knows who Greta Thunberg is.
I did not. So I'm a little ignorant here. My wife was like, "You really don't know who she is?" I had no idea. Kind
of controversial young woman that was fighting on climate, and then she expanded to everything between Palestine and everything in between.
You know what I loved about the documentary, like, and I'm not going to get into the arguments all behind all the climate change and stuff because that's such a large conversation, and I'm not going to go down that road. But you know what I loved about this documentary is here's this child, this obviously neurodivergent child, and she's got Asperger's or autism or something like that, or maybe a combination of more than one condition. But she's seen a problem that upset her, and then she was like, "Who's going to do something about it?" And then she was watching all these adults and all these people around her complain about it, but nobody did anything. And then she couldn't not. It was like, how can you say that you don't like this? How can you get upset? How can you get mad? How can you sit there and claim that, this is wrong? Mm-hmm. And then you just bitch about it. And then you walk around with your blinders on and you do nothing. And this little girl, like at 9 years old, stood up and did something. And it's like, holy shit, man, you talk about inspirational. I loved that because it was like, look, action, put your money where your mouth is, put your action where your words are, do it. Stop bitching about it. Stop talking about it and get involved. Anyway, I'm going to get off my soapbox, but obviously that's the driver, right? I mean, what are your thoughts on all this little rant I just went on?
Well, I think there's two lines of thought you can go down with that, and I'll do the first because this one's easier than the second one. So the first part of this is it's a lot easier to do something when you have a roof over your head, a hot cot, and hot meal. And at 9 years old, you got a hot cot and you got a meal. Or at least you should.
Valid point.
Yep. And the same goes for many people who have an issue, whether it's an opiate epidemic, whether it's whether it's impacts of AI in the workforce, whatever it may be. You may be the most passionate person in the world on that, but then you also have a family and you need to remain employed so that way you can take care of your family. And the second part of that is many people, this is scary. They don't know where to even begin. Like most people do not know how our government works. Most people do not know how a bill becomes law, how it's introduced, how it goes to the legislature, what the difference is between the state and federal governments, that you can pass laws that would be focused on medication safety at the state level that can be just as impactful as actions from the federal level. Most people have no idea of the system, how this quagmire works and how to make change in it. And so people say they lose a loved one to this and they want nothing more than to dedicate their lives to this. And I've seen this with several families that I'm very close with. They've sacrificed everything to begin with as they've lost a son. And then they go on to try to sacrifice everything so that way they can prevent the losses of other sons and other daughters for other families. And it comes at the cost of their livelihoods and their abilities to take care of themselves and the rest of their families. And so I think that's one part of it. The second part, and this is more going back to the medical profession and industry, is that there's a quote by an author, Upton Sinclair. It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding of it.
Well, I think that those are reasonable barriers, right? But change takes commitment, and change doesn't care about your excuses. And I know that's going to be challenging for the audience out there, but everybody has barriers, right? When you believe in something morally and you know it's right, and you know that these things are hurting people, and you know that these situations are hurting your family, that blind eye that so many people turn, that ignore, they refuse to educate. You don't have to go out there and get on the front lines. I understand you got families, you got things, but you can educate yourself. You can vote. You can sign that petition. You can make sure that you like that video. You can do your part in your day. You can use your truth and your words to help battle against that, right? And I think that's where, the passion from my end, it's not that everybody has to go out there and become an activist, but everybody has a part to play. And everybody, for the most part, isn't playing that part. In fact, like I've learned in this advocacy thing, the amount of people that are involved in this is very small.
Well, yes,
Very small. These are very loud voices from a very small group of people. And once this issue gets big enough, well, then the population will start to chime in and come in on it. But I've learned so much about inner workings of government. And, shout out to Will. Like, he's been telling me for years. And I'll be honest, until I seen it, it has been so eye-opening to me to realize how our government and how these things actually work. And I know we have so many people out there that are listening, and they're so caught up into the narrative that is being spoon-fed to them out into this theater of this theatrical show that we have that's called media. And they don't realize that behind these issues is no context. The congressmen and women that are standing up and they're speaking out against whatever issue that you're passionate about, they don't care. They're only speaking out on that issue because it's popular and it may get them a vote. All they want to do is get back into the office because their paycheck is coming from these corporations, it's coming from these special interest groups, it's coming from these lobbying organizations. And it is very rare to find someone who actually cares about an issue, which means that if you care about that issue, you got to make enough noise so that they do care, because how are they going to care if it looks bad on them? And it's sad to think that that is the true state of things, but I had to learn that goes for the Democrats, that goes for the Republicans, that goes for the independents, that goes for the libertarians. That is how this game works. And if you can't get enough attention around an issue, the likelihood of you getting something changed or moved, and it's not that there isn't good politicians out there, it's just that they're rare too.
Yeah.
They're very rare in this game. Well, and when you find them, it's a good one.
Yeah. Well, I've got a retired Marine general. It's a mentor of mine, and said this to me almost probably 15 years ago. Make the pain of doing nothing greater than that of doing something, whether that's phone calls, whether that's emails, whether that's going on the internet, whether that's doing a protest in front of your reps' offices or the state or federal capitals. That is what makes change, because ultimately they'll just deal with it because they don't want to deal with you anymore. And that is where I think we've seen the greatest amount of change. But going back to that quote from Upton Sinclair, his work goes back to the first real movement on American health, and that was in the early 1900s. And his most famous book is The Jungle, which detailed the cattle yards of Chicago. And what it really did is showed the food safety and quality across the country, where our food comes from, when they're doing the butchering in these cattle yards and these facilities. Horrific conditions, dangerous conditions for the workers, but disgusting conditions for the way that food wound up on our tables. They'd take shovels, and after days of accumulation of food scraps and meat scraps coming off of the line, they would take shovels and shovel that stuff back into the line, and that would go back out and into our food system. And Upton Sinclair's work helped to push and get past the Clean Food and Drug Act of 1906 by Theodore Roosevelt. And that was the first time our nation put regulations in place to protect our foods and our drugs and the things that we consume. And I think when we're talking about where we're at today on advocacy and making the pain of doing nothing greater than that of doing something, we also have to understand that all of this is cyclic. And as much progress was made in 1906, as much progress is made in the 60s and 70s as a result of a consumer rights movement, when we were seeing unsafe cars being built knowingly by General Motors and Ford and others, primarily American automakers, chemicals, the DDT that we were told is safe, and we were dumping out of airplanes pellets onto cities across the country, blanketing the cities of Detroit, Lansing, the entire campus of Michigan State and college campus, farm fields and cities across the country, and being told, oh, that's safe, it's fine, as we're watching our cats, dogs, kids, and family members die of chemical exposures. And so where we're at, I think today, is we're leading a reform movement. And we're not the sole ones. We are part of a larger movement that's occurring, and we just happen to have a lot of wind at our backs, because 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, when I was working on this was not a rewarding thing. This was an ostracizing thing, where I watched the mental health community, of which I was a part, ridicule me and shun me because I published my story of what happened to me with a medication cocktail, and inappropriately prescribed medications and not receiving informed consent when being prescribed Zoloft. And today we can say that we're making dramatic advances. We've got our nation's leading public health official, whether you like him or not. The reality is that he is addressing some very serious issues. Whether people agree with what he's talking about with vaccines, whether you agree with this conversation on medications and psychiatric drugs, the reality is that they're making changes to safety, and especially with the psychiatric medication component, in ways it's never been done before. We're even talking about it, like his announcement on May 4th, Secretary Kennedy's announcement on May 4th. We're going to provide training for our physicians on medication safety concerns. We're going to create standardized guidelines on tapering and a whole host of other actions. And our own successes has been within the veterans community, where we've built a 30-plus organization coalition of national veterans groups who are committed to making prescribing practices safer at the VA. And we've made successes. We've gotten the VA secretary to pull us into a room and tell us the VA is going to do written informed consent for antidepressants for up to age 30 and for when they co-prescribe a benzodiazepine and an opiate. That is nowhere near where they need to be. And we've sent a response letter to them saying as such that all these drugs need full informed consent and full written informed consent, because the doctors and patients are not having these discussions. But we're making progress that I couldn't have imagined 7 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2.5 years ago when we began this adventure. I don't think we all knew what was going to happen when I first came on board with the Grunt Foundation and Tim and Will brought me in. And I think what we've done is we've continually astonished ourselves. And to your point, it's come from sacrifices. It's come from people doing things that make themselves uncomfortable. But I think the reality is that we should be very proud of where we are today. I think we should be proud, but we should also see it as a clarion call for action, to your point, because you are correct. There's a lot that people can do, and it doesn't mean they have to go out and do what you and I and others have done for the past many years. You can do it from your couch. You can do it your car ride home. You can call your reps' offices.
What's the easiest thing that somebody can do to get involved? You know, we always hear this thing, send an email to your congressman. What's your opinion on that? Does that work?
It helps. I think that the things that really work, and it's changed over the years, but some of the basics still work. Social media has had tremendous impact on policymaking. When something goes viral, or a news story takes off and it's in everybody's faces to the point where you can't ignore it and it's constantly in front of you, that helps dramatically. And some issues have been flip of a switch. It got exposure, wound up on the Joe Rogan podcast, and then there they are in the White House with a bill signing ceremony for psychedelics, for example, right?
Yeah.
Without the Rogan podcast and without Rogan talking about that and calling the president, that doesn't happen. But it took years of work of many others, building the baseline and building the groundwork and building the foundation, or softening the target, if you'd say, with the artillery. But I think some of the most basic things are still can be the most effective. And so, but again, I think combination of communications, whether it's digital, personal relationships, so building relationships with your elected officials. But I'd say even more so, the most basic thing is get involved in an organization that is touching the issue that matters to you. And so if this issue is something that matters to you, go out and sign up for the email list for the Grunt Foundation so you can learn more. Go sign up as a member of the Veterans of Foreign Wars or the American Legion or Disabled American Veterans or whatever it may be. If they've got the issue that you care about, sign up as a member and volunteer. And you don't need to be a veteran to do this. If you're passionate about this, there's an organization called Antidepressant Coalition for Education. If you want to advocate for this there, and you're a civilian, that is a pathway. There's a lot of ways forward, but the more numbers that we can show that this is a problem, the more that we can say that we can make people uncomfortable. I mean, lots of emails, lots of phone calls. Every time they go to a town hall to speak, they're having someone asking them a question about, hey, what are you doing to make prescribing practice safer at the VA? Mm-hmm. And Why is it that we still continue to have these OIG investigations that show they're failing to provide informed consent or document informed consent? Like, that's gone a long ways. When I first began in 2008 advocating for the GI Bill with Student Veterans of America, like, it was still very much the old way of doing things. It was go to meet with your legislator or sign up with your group. Like, we built SVA and then partnered with the VFW and advocated on Capitol Hill that way. But it was still very much go in the office, shake the hand, communicate the problem, work with the legislative office, and try to get a solution. Social media was not as active as it is today. Nowhere near. It was the early days of Facebook and YouTube at the time. But what we did is we did leverage the technology we had at the time, and we planted veterans in town halls across the country. And we were asking John McCain why he wasn't supporting the post 9/11 GI Bill. Because he wasn't. Because he got bad counsel from his advisors. And they told him that too many troops would get out and we couldn't keep up with our demand and our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. I think it was terrible policy counsel, political counsel. But what turned the needle is when Bill O'Reilly started putting these videos out and talking about them on Fox News and criticizing a member of his own party for why he wasn't supporting a GI Bill when he is a war hero. And again, making the pain of doing nothing greater than that of doing something. He ended up compromising. And the bill passed. And so to your point is, at the most basic level, make a post on social media if you don't have time to go meet with your state representative or your state senator or congressman. Go online and send an email from the form that you have on your reps' websites. Those are some basic things, but collective action is what turns the needle.
Well, there you have it, folks. I mean, from a 20-year veteran in the advocacy space, I think those are wise words. And supporting the organizations that are doing the fights that you believe in. I mean, that's as easy as that, right? And it's a small lift, but, hopefully I didn't challenge anybody too much out there. But I do think that it takes everyone, right? It takes collective involvement. It takes collective movement in order to push these issues. And when we do have events that are highlighted, like the Lindsay Clancy situation, these are the moments, these are the times that produce change. And these are the times that we have to get involved and we have to be active so that we can prevent these kind of tragedies in the future, because this isn't the only one. This is just the one that made the news this time. There's hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of these events that nobody ever even hears about. And they're just as tragic. But this one is the one that made the news today. So that's why you have to stand up, and that's why you have to take action, and that's why you have to do that. But I'll tell you what, Derek, I am so grateful for you taking the time to be on the show today. We covered so much, and I've learned a lot just from listening to you. And there's a lot about this SSRI conversation that I didn't know. I got a lot of education last week from Dr. Zan. Dr. Zan told me a lot of stuff that I wasn't even aware of in this space, and then you have definitely shined the light on even more. And so I know if I'm learning, I'm hopeful that some of the audience is out there learning too. So before we wrap up for today, why don't you tell the audience where to find you, where to go to support what it is that you would like them to know? But I'll give you the stage just to give a wrap up in whatever way you feel best.
Awesome. So I'd ask if you're looking to learn more, go to the gruntstylfoundation.org. If you want to check out my website, derekblumke.com as well, if you want to contact me directly. We also have a lot of opportunities for advocacy involvement. If you want to support our organization, please feel encouraged to do so. But there's a couple calls to action I'd ask. Is anybody listening to this or watching this, please contact your member of Congress and ask them to support the Written Consent Act, and ask them to request the VA implements written informed consent at the VA. This is a huge topic that's occurring right now. The VA secretary is considering a series of actions on this issue right now. That's the most important thing you could do. Is if you have a direct line to the VA secretary, I'd encourage you to please reach out to him. He's got the opportunity to make sweeping actions across the VA that would save thousands of lives annually. And the more he can hear from our community, the more likely it is to implement those reforms. The same can be said for training We need retraining of our entire clinical workforce. Doctors are not educated on the adverse medication events. They're not educated or trained to identify the difference between a side effect of a medication and a new diagnosis. And so this is why we saw the prescribing cascade with Lindsay Clancy, why we saw the prescribing cascade with Julia Larson, and why we have seen the same thing in our own homes for the past several decades. So that's a huge component, is educating our educators or our clinicians and our counselors. And then a data release. The VA is probably sitting on the best health data in the world on mental health and medication prescribing. And so if we can get that data released to the public so we can actually all analyze it, the layperson today can now run something through AI and do the work of a PhD, which would otherwise take the course of many months, says my scientist wife. If we can get this data, this is the holy grail. This will show us what we've been doing for the past 20 and 40 years has not worked. And that this is why we have seen 108% increase of suicide rates for our youngest and most vulnerable veterans at the age of 18 to 34. And I think that this is where we have the greatest opportunity to drive reform, not just for the veterans and under the VA care or veterans at large, but the entire country. And so that's what I encourage everybody to do is follow your words, Anthony, is take action, send an email, make a post, do whatever it is, and be part of this movement that's occurring right now that is changing and reforming health and mental health for America.
Absolutely. Well, man, that was very well said, sir. And I just want to thank you for coming on the show today and taking the time to be here. I know you're an incredibly busy man, and I see your schedule, so I know that to be the truth. And you took the time out to come here today, and I'm grateful for that. And hopefully the listeners took something from this, and hopefully they understand that there is a cause out there to get behind. And, you know, situations like this with Lindsay Clancy hopefully will be something that is in the past, that we can move past. We have so many different alternative medications now in the mental health and psychedelic space that I think we are in the midst of a mental health reform in this country, and it's being led by individuals like yourself and other people within this community. And I thank you for the work that you are doing. So you know, you always have an open door to come back on this podcast whenever you like. So as the issues arise and when we come up, this can definitely be a stage for that, and we'd be glad to have you. So for the audience, guys, I thank you so much for bearing with us. I know that this was a little out of the box. We haven't talked about a lot of advocacy efforts, but everything that we're doing in the plant medicine space is steeped around mental health, and it's steamed around behavioral health and just human health in general. And SSRIs are an important part of this conversation. All prescription drugs are an important part of this conversation. We're being prescribed things that are causing great pain and great harm, and we don't have the education, and the education that exists out there, unfortunately, is misleading and deceptive sometimes. And you have to educate yourself. You have to listen. You have to come into this with an open mind. Don't just take somebody else's word for it. Just like I've told you on this channel, don't take our words for it either. You need to go research what we're telling you, and you need to verify this and make sure that it's true for you. Because maybe I got something wrong. Maybe our guest got something wrong. This is about personally educating yourself, and this is about getting yourself to a space to where you can have involvement and you can take charge and have authority in your space, because this doesn't just impact the community at large. It impacts your family, your friends, yourself, and we are the community. And the sooner that we recognize that and we take ownership that each and every single one of us are part of this larger community that we lived in, and that this is for us and for others, and by being for others, it is also for us. That is how this works. The more change, the more positivity, the more community that we are going to build in this country, and the brighter the future is that we are going to provide for not just ourselves, but for our children and our grandchildren. And that should be everyone's priority, because it's the world that we leave behind that matters, not just the one that we're living in. So with that, guys, the Burning Bear appreciates every single one of you guys out there. I will have more episodes coming down the pipe shortly. I got some great guests on the deck, and we will have a lot of information coming out. And as always, just make sure that you click that notification bell so that you get notified whenever I drop new content. You don't want to miss it out there. I'm sure of that. I know that every single one of you, this is the only podcast that you are excited about every single drop on. And but hopefully that isn't too far from the truth. But for this episode and for the Burning Bear, we are out.